I grew up on catfish. And so by the time I went to New York, they were like, catfish. Believe it or not, they actually, it's like trying to pull teeth to find catfish there. And so I was like, okay, I love bronzino. She said, okay, you're going to sear it. You're going to do this. And she walked me through this recipe. Then the next thing she came to my house and she said, let me look in your cabinet. And I was like, what?
Oh, man.
And she was like, I want to see what you have. Do you really have the tools that you really need?
She had 5 times the tools that you really need.
Because right before I met her, and I know a lot of you do this, I went to the store and I'm buying all of these tools. Thank you. I was like, I'm going to get this. I'm going to get that. I walked out of the store that I won't name because I don't want them to sue me. I walked out of this particular store that charges way too much for things. And I thought, and you see the movie Pretty Woman, where she walked out with the bag? I walked out of this particular culinary store. All the employees are following me. I was like, I made it. Look, Meg, walk it to the taxi with all this stuff. I get home. I'm unpacking. The receipt goes from here to that hand and back. That's how long the receipt was. I spent over $2,000. I said, my God, too. But I was caught in the moment. You know how, like, when you order an Amazon in the middle of the night and the box comes, you're like, what is that? That's how I felt. I got there and the receipt was so long and I still couldn't cook. It made the math wasn't mathing, as Taraji said. I was like, you telling me I spent $2,000 on spatulas and a garlic thing that you said about my garlic?
She had a peeler that I didn't know how to use.
It was like,
I was like, excuse me?
She was like, what is this? I said, it's a garlic peeler. She was like, I've been a chef for 30 years. I've never seen this in my life.
It was so complicated.
So she made me get rid of all my stuff. So if you go on eBay, I have a resale shop to pay for my child's college and these things. So she said, no. All you need are 3 knives.
3 knives, a paring knife, a serrated knife, and a chef's knife. That's all you need. You can have a successful running kitchen.
So I was like, okay, cool. So that little block that you have when you go home today that's taking up that whole space that you never use, you know the one.
The one that you only use 1 knife out of, and then you're like, all right, put that back in.
You know the one. Give it away. Just take the 3 knives out of there that you need. My mom has one. It's got like grease on it. It's all dusty. She never used it, but it's just there because it's next to a bowl.
It looks nice.
It looks good, but you don't need it. So she got rid of it. And then she said to me, get a fish spatula. I never heard, you knew what a fish, see, I didn't know.
Look at all these nods.
Because we're in New Orleans, everyone knows.
Yeah, exactly.
She said, get a fish spatula. Then she said, we're going to go get basics. We went to a
chef supply store,
like a
down
regular,
in Bowery, New York City.
Restaurant supply store, and where things were significantly less expensive than that. Thank you. See, I was like, and then she gifted me one of the most beautiful things that anyone has ever given me in my life:
a plastic Y peeler.
A little
$5. $5
peeler. And if you came to my house, you could take my son before you take my peeler. This little $5 plastic peeler. And she's like, this is all you need. But now you got to start tasting your food. Because I would get recipes and I would make it exactly as it said, but I wasn't tasting the food. I know it sounds crazy, but I know those of you who are not cooks, you understand. You're like, what? I'm just following the recipe. So you said you got to taste it.
You have to taste. As a chef, like if I go in and do line checks and like I'm talking to the line cooks, it's, did you taste it? Like if I taste something and it's under seasoned and that line cook hasn't tasted it, come on. Like if that's,
you gotta go.
You gotta go. Like that's part of the job, right? So like you can taste at any step in the recipe for the most part. I mean, yes, if you're cooking a steak, you can't like take a bite of the steak while it's raw, right? To make sure. But like, you get to know your salt.
You get to know your salt. And that's one of the things she taught me too, because Lish, so for perspective, and thank you so much for that introduction that my team wrote out. I don't even know who that woman was. You read it there. I was like, I did all that. Lish is your favorite cookbook author's favorite chef. What I mean by that, she is one of the most sought after recipe writers in the culinary world. Your favorite chef that you can think of right now probably called her to help them on their things. And that was very important to me as well, because everything that I do, I want to elevate as many people as possible. I have a children's book coming out. The illustrator, Ebony, of my kids' book is, I'm like, girl, you are coming on the show. You know how I'm in the shadows. So for me, I didn't want to just have a cookbook with my face on there. Y'all be like, Tamron Hall can cook. And you just see me cook sometimes. I wasn't playing like that. I was like, I am a cook I'm confident now, but I wasn't confident 8 years ago. But Lish is a highly sought after recipe writer. And that means when I call her, 99% of the time, she is testing out the recipe, testing it out, because our goal was that when you try this, we want to put your own New Orleans, wherever you from, little something in it. But this is a foundation of a recipe that when you do it, you are supposed to succeed. So for example, we have our cardamom French toast. It is one of the most beautiful French toast recipes. It is the kind of thing that Thanksgiving, for example, is coming up. And I try to pace myself when I'm cooking. I would do this at night and let it sit overnight because it soaks overnight, and we take you through it. Next morning, you bring it up to room temperature, put it in the oven. They can be eaten on that for breakfast while you're focused on the next thing. We have a no time to waste oven chicken because I have no time to waste, and neither do you. I probably cook 4 to 5 times a week. I leave the studio, I go home and cook. Mostly because once I saw my DoorDash guy do something to my food, and I was like, wait a minute.
She was like, oh, Lish.
I called Lish. I said, Lish, the man was delivering, and I looked through the hole, and I just don't believe what I just saw. I took it. I walked away, and I said, I'll never get delivery again from food. And it's hard in New York. But I cook probably like 4 to 5 times a week. So Lish tests recipes. One of the things she taught me was not all salts, for example, and we talk about it in the book, are created equal. We only use diamond crystal salt.
It's the best salt.
And we're not paid to do this. Yeah. And they should by now be paying us as much as we mention them.
We do mention them a lot, but like we know how it feels between our fingers. We know the saltiness of the salt. We know how quickly it dissolves. That's very important, right? Some kosher salts are a little bit coarser, so they take time to dissolve when you actually season your food. If you taste it and you're like, oh, it needs more salt, but that salt hasn't fully dissolved, all of a sudden your food's too salty.
Have you ever had something you say, this is so salty? It's probably because they salted it at the end. So the salt is just resting on top of that. So through the book, what Lish talks about is the tools you need. She then says, what should you put in your pantry? So that's, for example, I'd never cooked with or had whole grain mustard. The mustard I grew up with was yellow, and I still keep it in my refrigerator. But it's in a little plastic container.
It has its time and place.
It is a great mustard that I love. But she was like, okay, this is how you make a basic vinaigrette. So your vinaigrette is always there. So if you want to throw a little salad on with your chicken or your fish, we travel a lot together, and we gone to Antigua. And I said, Lish, the first thing I want to do in this cookbook, and also because I've spent a lot of time in New Orleans, I want to do a whole fish. Because every time I come here, I have a whole fish, but I'm scared to make it. And I'm amused when people say, I don't like the fish looking at me. I'm like, the fish is dead. It's not looking at you. You're looking at the fish. Trust me, it's not looking at you. Well, my father fished a lot. I grew up with people who fish. I just took Moses, if you saw on the show, on his first fishing excursion. We went fishing. We caught the fish. We came back. I fried the fish. And if you ask my son what happened to fish, he's like, Mama fried it and we ate it. I was like, yes, we did. But Lish and I put a whole fish in this, really as a love letter to the fact that a whole fish is intimidating to make, but nothing tastes better than a whole fish to me.
And it's actually relatively easy to do. The hardest part is getting over the intimidation of the whole fish, of something looking at you, quote unquote, right? Otherwise, it's basically like kind of steaming itself, so it stays moist and flaky. And as long as you are patient with it, it's easy to flip. You get the crispy skin. It's amazing.